Tunes with Tom, music from the great American Songbook on Lakeshore 64, WLHA.
Hi, I'm Tom Bolger. You were just listening to a little bit of Tunes with Tom. When I was a youngster, about 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I used to spin records. I used to cue them up and announce them and play them. These were all my older brothers and sisters' records. And then when I went to high school, I dated a girl because her father was a disc jockey at WTMJ in Milwaukee, and after dates we could go and listen to his late night program and watch him perform. So when I got to college at Trinity in Hartford, Connecticut, I had a program on the local radio station called Tunes with Tom. And that started me out on a career that I loved, that was very generous to me. And it started a kind of an interesting story that you might like to listen to. And then combined with that story, the love of my life, my wife, we've been married for over 70 years, and 4 wonderful children. I've led a really great life, and I'd like to share it with you. So the program that I started with is Tunes with Tom. Now we're going to talk about Times with Tom. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1933. My father was Vic Bolger. He was a physician in Milwaukee, and my mother was Zoe Bolger. And the two of them were from the Minocqua and Woodruff area in northern Wisconsin, which had a strong impact on my life because we spent a lot of time up there in the summers. But anyway, I had a brother who was 13 years older than me. I had a sister who was 10 years older and another sister who was 2 years older. And the dynamics of the family was quite interesting because by the time I have really any memory of things happening in our household, my brother and my sister had moved out. He had gone to college. And then, of course, the war came along and that changed the dynamics again of everything. But when I was a little kid, I had what I'd call a perfect life. We lived on the west side of Milwaukee until I was 6 years old. Then we moved to a suburb of Milwaukee called Shorewood. And we lived in the bottom floor of a duplex there. And there were 6 in the family. And my brother and I, the short time that he was around, we had a small little cubbyhole kind of room off the kitchen. And then there were 2 other bedrooms and 1 bath for the 6 of us. But my mother made it a great household, and we always had fun. We always had great memories of the times when we were small little kids. I remember one time I was going to run away from home, but I had orders I couldn't leave the block. And so I went down to the corner, and there was a church there. They had a little alcove in the back, so I went back to the alcove, and one of my tasks had been always to go to get the groceries, and they'd give me a list of the groceries. Then I'd go to the grocery store and give it to the guy behind the desk, and he would go ahead and get the groceries. I mean, it wasn't the way it is now with supermarkets. They actually got the can of peas and the pound of butter or whatever, and then I would take it home. So I figured I could be self-sufficient running away like that, except when I got to the church, I figured I didn't know how to spell carrots. So I came home, and that was the end of my adventure running away. But I had a cousin that lived just a block away, and we were kind of constant companions. He was the same age and in the same grade, and his name was Del Nahazo. But anyway, when I was 6 years old, we moved to another home in Shorewood. And this was about a block away from St. Robert's, where I went to grade school. And those were just wonderful years. I always tell my children that I walked to school every morning and walked home at night. They said, yeah, but Dad, you only lived a block away, which was true. But we had great times at St. Robert's. And the one thing that I did at St. Robert's was I started to play football. And I loved football. That was my, by far, favorite sport of any of them. And that actually had an effect on the rest of my life. Not that I went and continued to play football, but it meant where I went to high school. And that was very important. Most of the young men who went to St. Robert's went to Marquette High School, which was a huge high school. There were about 1,500, 2,000 young men that went to Marquette. And of course I couldn't play football at Marquette. Well, my sister had gone to a private independent school called Milwaukee University School. And so I decided I'd go there because the classes were only about 35 people. They had a football team, and I could play football there because I was still a little guy. I wasn't very big. And so I could play football, so I went to Milwaukee University School. And that had a huge impact on my life because the first date I had in high school was my current wife, Shayla. And we've been married 70 years. And that was all the result of going to Milwaukee University School and meeting her there. But anyway, of course, one of the big things that was part of my life was the start of the Second World War. Started in 1941. I was only 8 years old at the time. I can remember when the war started on December 7th. My sister and I were at the Downer Theater, and all of a sudden they stopped the film, and a man came out on the stage and he said, "We're interrupting this to tell you that the Japanese had struck Pearl Harbor, and it's probably going to be war." And my sister was with me, and she said, "I'm going to call my mom and dad to see if they know." So at that time, of course, they had payphones, so she went out in the lobby and she left me in the theater. And it was my first, I think, experience of really wondering what was going to happen to my life. This was a war, and I didn't really know what a war meant. But anyway, we soon did learn. My brother served in the service. My brother-in-law, my two brother-in-laws served in the service. I was of that particular age that I didn't. And then when other wars came out, the Korean War, etc., I was in college and I had a deferment, a student deferment, what they called a 2S deferment. But when I got into graduate school, they went ahead and stopped graduate school deferments. And so I reported for a physical, and I was classified as 4F. I had terrible eyes, and I asked the sergeant at the desk that stamped my report 4F, I said, "Is it my eyes?" He said, "No, flat feet." So maybe that's why I liked water skiing so much, because my feet were so flat. It could be. But anyway, the war had a big effect on me and, of course, everybody. In our families, we had the stars in the windows indicating that we had people in service. And luckily, everybody came back all right, and we were a very lucky family. Yeah. My father was a doctor, and when I went off to college, it was kind of expected I'd be a doctor as well, because my brother was a doctor. My brother had gone in the Army, and he had gone to what they called, I think it was the V12 or the V8 program, was for doctors, and he graduated from Northwestern, and then he went to Cook County for internship, went to Walter Reed Hospital to finish his military career. And then he did a fellowship at Mayo Clinic for 5 years. So he was a wonderful doctor, a wonderful man, had a great influence on my life. He probably influenced me more than anything because even though I didn't see him and he was away, he was always very close to me. And I felt it, he felt it, even though there was 13 years difference. My father was a physician and only a physician, you might say. I never saw my dad swim, never saw my dad in a pair of shorts, never saw my dad, we never played baseball or anything. All that was taught to me by my brother, who was kind of my semi-father, or my uncle, who lived close by. And I referred to my cousin that was the same age in high school, but that was his father. And so my cousin and I always were very close during that period of time. And but my father was a workaholic. He worked 7 days a week. He had regular office hours. He'd be gone early in the morning because he always wanted to be the first in the operating room. And then in anticipation of my brother coming back and joining him, he had office hours in Waukesha, Cedarburg, and Port Washington during the week. And so he would come home and he'd have dinner and he'd leave, and he wouldn't come back until 10 o'clock at night. On Saturdays, he would come home and he would sit in the living room and listen to the Metropolitan Opera. And it was my brother who got me out and taught me how to play tennis and things of that nature. And my brother-in-law, he got me involved in hunting and golf and other activities. So I always was very busy, and sports was always a very important part of my life. And a lot of it I have to owe to my brother and somewhat to my brother-in-law in those respects. And of course, I thought, participating in sports teaches you so much about other people and involvement, friendships, and commitments and things of that nature. I like to see kids involved in sports. When I was in high school, or actually when we were quite younger, when I was about 9 years old, my parents bought a summer home up in Minocqua, and we spent all our summers there. The day after school was over, we would go up to Minocqua, and we wouldn't come back until the day before school started in the fall. And of course, my parents coming from that area, I was accepted. Everybody knew who I was, and I had a lot of cousins up there that we could play with all the time. So that was always a joyous time. And it was kind of interesting. I was never called Tom up there. I was always called Zoe's boy. You're Zoe's boy, right? And I proudly would say, you bet. But that had an effect on it because I started to water ski. It was a funny story. There were it turned out to be a doctor and an attorney who were just out of the service. They came to our home, and my dad had a Chris Craft boat, and they said, if we could borrow your Chris Craft boat to go water skiing today, we'll teach Tom how to water ski. My dad said, fine. So off they went. Well, I learned to water ski, and then I developed it was kind of a new sport around. And then I got involved with a ski organization called the Minocqua Bats, and then that really flourished. And that just a couple of weeks ago celebrated their 75th anniversary up in Minocqua. And I was part of the founding group on that, and I'm very proud and very happy of it. But it kind of started me in some other areas that I hadn't been familiar with, and one of them was getting involved with the management of people and getting involved with a business, because I was the second president of the organization, and that's when it really took hold. And we built a kind of a bleacher stadium along the lakefront. We built the ski jumps, and we got to be, although we weren't professional, we got to be about as professional as you could get. And also then I started a business of teaching water skiing, the Minocqua Water Ski School. And so that was my first chance of starting a business. And with the presidency of the organization, it taught me a little bit about organization and what it meant to have a board and what it meant going out and trying to raise money and all that kind of stuff, which really affected my life from that point forward. So it was a wonderful experience. The other things about Minocqua is When I was involved with the Minocqua Bats, it was interesting because after the club had been organized for about 2 years, Cypress Gardens water ski show came up and gave a demonstration, and that really taught us some of the professional aspects of the sport. So our organization became quite professional at that time, and it was pretty highly regarded on its program and its proficiency in skiing. And I did 3 things, basically, actually 4 things with the club. I was their announcer, and that helped, of course, with my broadcasting and kind of develop that interest. I also did the what they call the triple crisscross, the backward skiing. I had a pair of skis backwards so I could ski backwards, and then I did the final jump in a clown uniform. It was a top hat and a tails that I would wear. And there would be 3 skiers that would go out, and we would pretend we were drunk, and we would be skiing all over the place. And then one would go ahead and jump off the jump and with her skis on, another one would do that. And then the last one, I would approach the jump and dive, and that was the finale of the show. And that was always a lot of fun to do. But the announcing helped there because of the professionalism. But then it was kind of interesting. After that, I never did announcing again. And I had a 30-year career in the broadcast industry, and now I'm back. And it's a lot of fun. Going back again about meeting my wife, I have a lot of great stories about, she was my very first date, as I mentioned, when I was a freshman in high school, and I was asked to a party, and my sister, who's 2 years older, Barbara, she was kind of my social secretary, and she taught me everything that young men should know about dating women. And she said, well, you're going to take somebody, aren't you? And I said, I have no idea. So I called the girl giving the party, and I said, is there somebody there I can take? She said, well, there's another new student in class, Shayla Kiley, you can take her. So I called Shayla, and she agreed to go. My dad drove. I picked up Shayla, and we drove to the party, went to the party, and after the party, my dad drove us back to her house and dropped her off. And that was my first date with her. And from that point on, she was very special to me. We were kind of had a relationship of on and off for a few years, but our senior year we got back together and went on a regular basis. And that was a great year and a great summer. But then when we went off to college, it kind of broke off at that area. And I never really dated anybody after that until my junior year in college. I was with Shayla, and we went ahead and got back together, and then it became very serious, and we decided that we would get married, which we did. The college that I chose, it was much like high school. I wanted a small school, preferably out east, a men's only school, and I didn't know much about what the choices were, but I knew one person that went to Trinity College in Connecticut, so I applied there. And I also applied at a couple other schools, but I heard back from Trinity first, and they had accepted me, so then that just became the school I was going to go to. So I went to Trinity, and it fulfilled my needs perfectly, but it really called it to the point that I was interested in broadcasting. When I was in high school, I was kind of interested in broadcasting, being a disc jockey. I can remember fooling around with a record on a turntable and queuing it up and announcing the song, etc. And I used to date a woman whose father worked at WTMJ, and he had a late night record show. And I'd purposely ask her out, and then we'd go to a movie, and then she'd say, well, what do you want to do now? And I said, let's go and watch your dad at the radio station. So we'd go to WTMJ and sit in an announcer's booth and watch her father perform. And I always thought that was great. But when I went to college, my father wanted me to be in pre-med, and I thought that I wanted to also. And I got involved the first year with the radio station, and pre-med kind of slipped by. So I continued in radio and at the station, and I became the station manager. And then my junior year, my senior year, I was the director, one of the directors for the intercollegiate broadcasting system. The country was broken up in different sections, and I had New England as my area. So I was really interested in broadcasting, but I didn't really think about pursuing it as an actual career. So that when I was a senior and ready to graduate, we were going to be married that summer. Sheila and I were looking at what I could possibly do, and I thought, well, I'll go into a sales executive program, which was probably the only thing that a history major, which I finally became, could probably do. And I got a job offer at American Brass Company in Waterbury, Connecticut. And I considered that, and I had to let them know by a Tuesday whether I would accept the job. And I just thought, God, I don't want to live in Waterbury, and I don't want to sell brass the rest of my life. So I called Syracuse University that had a graduate program in broadcasting, and I said, if I go to your school, will you accept me? And they said, well, what were your grades and what were your activities? And I told them, and they said, well, we'll accept you contingently on reviewing all these things that you'll be sending us from the school. So anyway, I called Waterbury, Connecticut, and I told American Brass I wasn't interested. I wanted to be in broadcasting. And that was probably the best decision I ever made in my life, because it was an industry that I absolutely loved and was fairly successful in. And it was always a fun job as far as I was concerned. But anyway, that summer, after I accepted going to Syracuse, is the year Sheila and I got married. And we went out to Colorado for our honeymoon. And she was a big horseback rider. She had always ridden in horseback competition, and since she'd been a little girl. So she was very familiar with horses, and that's kind of why we went out there. And unfortunately, the first day we got there, the cowboy said, do you want to go on the fast ride or the slow ride? I said, oh, fast ride. Sheila said, no, wait, think about that. You may want to go on the slow ride. Oh, no, I want to go on the fast ride. So I went on the fast ride, and I got the biggest blisters on my butt you'd ever want to see. So our honeymoon that was supposed to be a lot of fun on horseback ended up, there was no horseback riding for me because of my silliness of going on the fast ride. Well, we got back to Milwaukee from our honeymoon in Colorado, and we packed a U-Haul trailer, and we took off for Syracuse, New York. The first night that we got to Syracuse, we hadn't made any advance reservations at a motel or anything, and we didn't realize that it was the New York State Fair was in Syracuse that particular weekend. So we couldn't get a motel, and we kept going farther and farther outside of Syracuse, New York. We finally found a motel, but it was really a room in kind of a biker bar. And we had this U-Haul trailer that had all our worldly possessions in. And so Sheila and I checked in, and there were about 5 bedrooms up in the second floor of this biker bar, and one bathroom. And it was a tough place, and I thought, all our possessions are going to be stolen. So about 11 o'clock at night, I went down and I backed the trailer up against a telephone pole, so they couldn't open the door of the trailer. They couldn't put the back door down. So anyway, that saved our possessions, and the next day we could go ahead and find the apartment that we had rented and checked in. Then the next couple of days we spent buying furniture. Then I started school, and it was exactly what I was looking for. It had all the elements that I needed to be able to get a job. They actually had programs on a commercial station that emanated from the studios of the university that we were the floor crew. So I learned how to operate a camera and a mic boom and switching and directing, and I learned all that mechanical thing. And then also they had the academic part of it. They had the mathematics of ratings and how that took place, advertising, the effectiveness of advertising, salesmanship. It was just a perfect course for what I was looking to do. And so I was in heaven having to do it. Actually, it was pretty lonely for poor Sheila, because we had an apartment. It was a very small apartment. We were paying $80 a month rental on this apartment. I think it was $75 actually, $75 a month. And it was in a kind of low-cost housing because I wasn't a veteran. I wasn't eligible for campus accommodations. There were a lot of veterans from Korea that were classmates of mine, and of course they were eligible for student housing. But we went to student housing a lot because every Friday night a group of us would get together and would have a beer and then some food, and we'd talk politics, talk television. It was just a perfect atmosphere for me, you know, to develop in. I was familiar with radio from my college days, but television was kind of new, and I didn't have the academic training in knowing some of the things that were important. So anyway, in December of that year, we decided to go home to Milwaukee, so we flew home, and I can still remember that Christmas vacation because Sheila wasn't feeling well, and she went down to see her obstetrician, and sure enough, they announced that she was pregnant, and that was December 29th. And we celebrated that event at Sheila's home in Milwaukee. And then we had the particular problem of the doctor wasn't sure when the birth date was going to be. He knew it was going to be sometime in August, but didn't know if it was going to be late August or first part of August. And I, of course, was graduating at the end of August, and I needed to go someplace and get a job. And I didn't want to go ahead and leave her in the breach where she was just about to have a baby and leave town. And so we decided that it would be practical on 4th of July if we flew to her back to Milwaukee, and she stayed with her parents then until she had the baby, and then I had the flexibility. So I went back to school, continued to have a great program there and really enjoyed it. And Tisha had the baby, or Sheila had the baby, we called Tisha, on the 27th of August. And it was about 3 weeks, the 10th of August. Had the baby on the 10th of August, and it wasn't until 3 weeks later that I saw Tisha for the first time. And I was through school, and now the big question was finding a job. I had kind of inquired around, and there wasn't much opportunity that I saw. And of course, all my classmates were scrambling for work, and some people went into educational television, some people went back into teaching, other people were just looking for commercial opportunities. Some networks, some film companies, it was a wide variety of it. I was looking for a local station position in production. That's what I wanted to do. I thought that would be my area. And so I got back to Milwaukee and I started to look for work, and I couldn't find anything around Milwaukee. I went to up to Green Bay, there was nothing available. I went over to La Crosse, there wasn't anything available. I kind of floundered for about 2 weeks. looking for work, sending out resumes, trying phone calls, doing whatever I could. And of course, I was living with my in-laws with a new baby. And I think everybody was anxious to find out what was going to happen. Finally, I got a call from my father one Sunday night, and he said that a friend of theirs, a relative, had stopped by to see them and mentioned that there was going to be a job position opening at Channel 7 in Wausau, Wisconsin. Well, I had never really considered Wausau as an opportunity. It was such a small market and everything. So I called Wausau because I needed a job. And I called and I talked to the receptionist and said, I understand they were looking for a production manager, and I thought I would be qualified and I'd like to come up and schedule an interview. They said, no, it wasn't a production manager they were looking for a promotion manager. With all my background to graduate school, I didn't know what a promotion manager did. I had no concept of it. So the next day I called two of the promotion managers in Milwaukee. I can still remember this. A guy by the name of Bob Van Roo, who was the promotion manager at Channel, I don't know, I think 6 or something, WITI, which was a CBS-owned station, and a fellow by the name of Bruce Hamilton, who was the promotion manager at WTMJ in Milwaukee. I said I was a graduate student at Syracuse doing a research paper, and I wanted to interview them on what promotion managers did. So I went down and talked to these two gentlemen, and they went ahead and gave me all their information, all their background, everything that I needed. So that when I went up to Wausau a couple days later, the first question they asked me was, what would you do as our promotion manager? Well, I just repeated what those guys had told me a couple days earlier. I mean, I sounded really smart, I guess. But anyway, I got the job. And that was my entree then into commercial broadcasting. And it was an ideal job. It was a promotion manager in a single station television market. It was owned by all the newspapers in the area, so promotion was no problem. If I wrote a story, the papers would publish it. And we had the biggest radio station to put on commercial announcements. So it was very easy being the promotion manager at Channel 7 in Wausau, Wisconsin. And I probably looked pretty good. But the real advantage I had, this is kind of interesting, after I'd been there for about 3 or 4 weeks, most of the people that worked there and actually were in management were smarter than anything and ran a good operation, but they weren't technically aware of some of the stuff going on in the industry. And I'd had that advantage going to graduate school. And after I'd been there for about 3 or 4 weeks, the general manager came in and said, Bolger, do you know anything about ratings? Well, I'd had a course on ratings when I was at Syracuse. So I said, yeah. So he said, the ARB, which was the American Research Bureau, he said, is just starting to test small markets like Wausau. And he was coming to try to sell them the service. And would I come in and sit on the meeting? Well, of course, anybody from our station didn't know anything about ratings except me, so I could ask the questions, and I must have sounded pretty smart or whatever it was, because I could ask the appropriate questions and say that sounded good or sounded bad, and why didn't they do this sampling, why didn't they do that? Well, from that point on, I was always considered management. It was kind of interesting that whenever there was something that was going on, they would include me. So that was the real thrill of being in Wausau. And Wausau was a wonderful town. My wife and I had a great time there. We had 3 more children that were born in Wausau. And we met a lot of good friends while we were there. It was a good experience. I got involved. One of the things that the station was very concerned about is their personnel being involved with community events. And so I helped form an Optimist Club, and then I was president of the Optimist Club there. And also, when we bought our first home, when our second child was coming, we bought another home, and it was, at that time, it was a beautiful home. It was $21,500, and that was much more than I could afford because I was making about $80 a week at the time. And I couldn't afford the home even at $21,500. And a friend of mine's father was an electrical engineer, and I said to Sid, I said, could your father come over and look at our house? I don't know anything about electrical systems or heating or air conditioning or anything. Could he come over and look at it? And he said, oh, he'd be happy to. So his father came over, looked at it, said, it's a good house, it's a good price, you know, you probably should buy it. And I said, but I can't afford it. He said, I'll make you work harder. Well, I didn't know really what he meant at that time. But when I bought it, then I found out. Because when I was in Wausau at night, I went to a real estate school and became a licensed real estate broker. I had an advertising job that I worked on a hearing aid company and did advertising for that. And then also I started a company called Draco Company, and this was with DuPont Research from Delaware. They came in, and because it was a single station market, they were doing some advertising on DuPont products and then testing it. They didn't have anybody to run the research part of it locally. So I said that I would form a company and do it. And so I formed Draco Research, and I did research for Draco. I'd do that at night. I rented a small room in downtown Wausau, and then I'd go to church groups, and I would hire people from the church organizations and then give donations to the church. So these ladies would come, and I think I had maybe a dozen phone lines, and they would come at 5 o'clock, and I'd be there, and then they'd do telephone calls until about 9 o'clock at night. It would be the latest they could call. And then I'd take the results and put them in the post office and get home late at night. So it was long days, and I have to give Shayla credit because she raised the 4 children when they were just little mites, and she was just a wonderful mother to them, and it was a wonderful experience. Well, so we look back and think of those were fun days that we had. And then because the position was relatively new to the station as a promotion manager, I had to go ahead and develop a lot of activities for the station. So we did, we started golf tournaments, and we had banquets, and we had all-star football player nominations, and it really was a complete job in promoting the station, even though we had the advantages of owning the media in the area. So anyway, but I guess I'm saying it was a successful thing, and I had some other opportunities to go other places. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, the money was a little better, but I was very content where I was, but I didn't know what kind of future I had. And I was working with what I thought were wonderful people, very fair-minded, and I always thought that I would like to stay with the company, and that would be my preference, but of course I still had to be practical. So I had a job offer to go down to someplace in North Carolina, and I went into the manager of the company, who was kind of my mentor and turned out to be a very good friend of mine, and asked him, his name was Dick Dudley, and I said, Dick, I'm not trying to get more money or anything, but I've got this problem and I just don't know what to do. And he said, well, you have to do best for your family. But he said, let me tell you this, Tom. He said, our company, we want to grow it, and we're in an opportunity to grow it, and our board of directors wants to grow it, and we would like you to be part of that growth. And that's all he had to say. I was convinced that I would, trust him and stay with the company, which I did. And they were going to open a radio station in Kaukauna, Wisconsin. And they told me, they said, okay, you're going over and run that. We told you you'd be the first to get Kaukauna, or get a position in our growth pattern. So I went over to Kaukauna. The station wasn't on the air yet, but I designed a building, and I designed material rate cards and coverage maps and everything. And what happened is there was a technical overlap of the Kaukauna station with our Wausau station. And the Federal Communications Commission said, well, you can't go on the air until you solve that overlap. So everything was put on hold. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, the Madison television became available. And so I was set for Kaukauna, so now they were looking for somebody for television. So they had these outsider people come in, and these were all men at the time. There were no women in management in that area at that point. And so these guys would come in from New York and Los Angeles applying for the job as the manager at the Madison station. And I can still remember they would come to the station, and they would then go into the front office and close the door, and I'd walk by and know these people were talking about this big job in management. And then invariably, this good friend of mine, he would come into my office, hey Bolger, he said, drive Mr. Smith to the airport, would you? And so I'd get in the car and drive these guys, and of course they'd start pumping me. How long have you worked for this company? Well, I've worked for them for 6 years. What kind of people are they? Well, they're okay. Do you think I'd be happy here? Well, it depends. You like small towns. And anyway, one day Dick came to me and he said, how would you like to manage Madison? We don't know when Kaukauna is going to open up, but Madison is, we're going to be buying that in the next couple weeks, and would you like to go down there? Well, what a difference. Kaukauna, Wisconsin in radio, a startup station with a station already existing in Madison, Wisconsin, top 100 markets, television. He said, but it's been losing money, so he said, we'll give you 6 months down there, and if you don't turn it around in 6 months, he said, we're going to have to replace you. He said, my name is on the line here with the board, and I told him that you could do it. And so we depend on you to do it, and if you don't, we're going to have to replace you. And I said, I understand that. So I went down, and Sheila stayed in Wausau. I came down in May in Madison, and I took over the station, and had lost money for the last few years. And the first month, the station made money, and it never lost money from that point on. So it was very successful. And then the company grew, and I grew with the company. And we ended up with 12 radio stations, 6 television stations, newspaper, electronic company, a film production company. It was a great experience. So I came down to Madison, and then Sheila came down shortly thereafter, right before school started. So probably around the end of August, we bought a house on West Lawn Place. And I can remember when we moved down, all that I ever wanted to do is I got. I thought that this is all I ever wanted in my life, and I needed. It was a great job, and along with it, I was paid $10,000 a year, and I got a car. And I thought, that was it. That's all you needed. Obviously, I was wrong. But anyway, Sheila came down, and we bought this house, and the job worked out beautifully. I mentioned that it was a very profitable job, but it also allowed me the opportunity to do a lot of things in the community. And Sheila and I could get very close to our children and have a very nice life together, and that was a major part of it. I did some traveling, and I did a lot of community work during that time, which I'll go into a little bit later. But it really was the time when our children really needed us too. And thank God Sheila was there, because she was the perfect person for that role. And she did a wonderful job, because I was gone quite a bit. One of the mandates that our company had was that you get involved with the community. And when they would have annual board meetings, all the managers would come up and make presentations to the board of directors about their ratings that they had, what their profitability was, what the future was, what things, and the board members would always say, well, what's your involvement with the community? What have you done for the United Way? What have you done for your local hospital? What publicity have you undertaken that's been a major contribution to the community? So that was very important to the board of directors. And so my role in here in the community, I just did that, and I got involved with United Way, and I worked in the United Way in various capacities, and chairman of this division or that division, or loaned executive program or whatever, and always been fairly reliable, fairly successful in the work. And one day, the president of the United Way and the executive director stopped by my office unexpectedly. And they said, this year's chairman has decided that he doesn't want to do it. The previous year they had had a very unsuccessful campaign. They hadn't set a goal, but they had gotten less money than they had the year before, and everybody was extremely upset. And the person that was designed to be the campaign chairman left. And so they said, would you undertake it? Well, that didn't look like very good prospects. But I said, number one, we have to have a goal. And number one, you have to do a few things that I think are necessary to be able to bring back the United Way the way it should be. And that is that I want to personally call on the top 50 donors of the United Way. You pick out the top 50 donors, and I'll make individual calls on those people to make sure that we not only get what we call their fair share, but also maybe an increase. And they said, okay. And so I took that role, and I personally visited during that campaign 50 of the top executives, plus attending a lot of other events and doing a lot of other things. But I made appointments, and I had a little kind of suitcase that I carried around that had a slide projector in. And they had a very dramatic presentation for about 3 minutes that I would play for this person, and then I would talk about their pledge to the United Way and how they could contribute, how their employees could contribute, etc. And make a long story short, we were very successful. We made our goal, and it was a lot of coverage in the newspaper, a lot of coverage on television. There was it kind of changed my position in the community, I think, a lot, because there was a lot of publicity and it was successful. And those personal visits, I had an opportunity to personally meet the 50 top givers in the community, which was a person in a sales business is ideal. And then because that was successful, it kind of led me into a lot of other community events. So over the years, I was president of the Madison Advertising Club. I was president of, the chairman of the board of Edgewood College, president of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association. So it gave me an opportunity after the United Way success and meeting all those executives of other opportunities to get involved. And so I ended up on a bank board, a savings and loan board of directors. I was asked to be chairman of the board of Edgewood College. I was on the Kidney Foundation board. And the Kidney Foundation board, it was interesting because it was the period where we were having the Gift of Life legislation passed. So it was kind of a legislative work and involvement, and also some, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, but anyway, people were saying that the Catholic Church was against kidney donations and kidney harvesting when you have an accident or something, and giving your kidney to a survivor. And I didn't think that was right, and I remember another gentleman by the name of Bill Walker, who was very involved, personally knew the bishop in town. We went to the bishop and we asked him about this. Is the Catholic Church against this program? He said, of course not. No, not at all. And so that's what started the legislative action that we took to start the Gift of Life program here in the state. And it took on a whole new look once the bishop said yes, they were for it. And I felt some feeling of success in being part of that, along with Bill Walker, in making that happen. So that's the kind of effect that we could have in the community that I thought was important. But anyway, then of course with the community thing, I was still active in my business, and I was asked to be on a few boards in that area. The Television Information Board was one of them. That was a national organization to promote television. Another one was the Broadcast Education Association, which is a group of broadcasters and educators. And from Syracuse days, I knew a number of people that were in pretty high positions in the organization. I ended up being chairman of the board of that organization, the Broadcast Education Associations. We printed the Broadcast Journal, which was the real academic journal of broadcasting. And then that led to the National Association of Broadcasters, and I ran for the board of directors there, and I was elected to the board of directors. And they used to rotate. There was a television board, there was a radio board, and then there was a joint board. And I got on the board, and then I was asked to run for the vice chairman of the television board, which I did, and I became the vice chairman. I won that election. And I remember there was a writer in Washington on television called the Television Digest. His name was Tack Nail. He was from Oklahoma, and he used to talk like this. And he said, "Tom, you know what you done?" And I said, "What are you talking about, Tack?" He said, "You running for that, you're going to be chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "No," he says, "the way it works," he says, "they alternate. And you're in position in 4 years to be chairman of the board." And I counted, and he was right. And sure enough, I became chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters, which is the premier organization in broadcasting with radio and television stations. And I was involved with that organization for about 8 years. And I was chairman for my last 2 years there. And that was a lot of time away from home, a lot of time traveling. And here again, like in the United where I said I would visit 50, I kind of took an objective during my term to visit state organizations and to shore up the cooperation between states and the federal government. And that was very successful. And then there was some foreign travel. I'd never really traveled outside the country much. And we were in a kind of a political dilemma because of some things that were happening at the World Administrative Radio Conference, which happens every 10 years. And those are the people that divide frequencies up. You know, you have to have 9 degrees separation, or you have to kilocycles, or whatever it is. I'm not a technician, so I'm not going to get into some of the problems. But I know politically, the National Association of Broadcasters was very involved. And one time they called us from a meeting in Switzerland and said, "We need help." And so the president of the association, myself as chairman of the board, with our wives, flew over to Switzerland to have some private parties with people that we could negotiate with, but they couldn't. That was one of the rules that they had. And so that got me into foreign travel. And then later on, we had conferences in Mexico and Canada, because we were Region 9 of the World Administrative Conference. And it just gave me kind of a little more worldly outlook. It was kind of fun. And I think I was 40 years old before I traveled to Europe. And now, of course, kids go when they're, 10 years old practically. But it was a long time, and then that kind of, both Shayla and I enjoyed it. And so when I retired, then we traveled quite a bit, which I can. But anyway, the whole business of Madison, Wisconsin, which was a wonderful town. I mean, it has, for television, it's just made for a television station. It's got, of course, the legislature is here, the university is here. It's a beautiful town. It's a lot of controversy always around. I mean, there's always, politically, it's always an active community. You never have to go very far to get another point of view. It's just a wonderful place to raise our children. And our children all went to high school here. They went to Edgewood High School. They went to Edgewood, I guess would be elementary school. Then they went to Edgewood, a high school. And none of them really stayed here to graduate in college. One went out to Montana. Our youngest son, Jim, he started here for 2 years, but he was in oceanography. He decided to go to the University of Washington, so that's where he graduated from and went to graduate school. Another son went to Lawrence, and then he went down to Drake University for a law degree. We had one daughter who went out to the University of Montana, but decided she didn't complete college, but she got married and raised a family. And then another daughter went to Helena and then went to graduate school in Minnesota. And so all of them got good starts here. None of them stayed here, but all of them went out. And now none of the children live here. They live one in each time zone. One out near Boston, one in Minneapolis, one in Missoula, Montana, and one outside Seattle, Washington, each of the time zones. One thing in my job, of course, it's been very visual. When I first moved here, I did editorials live on television every night. And then we got a tape machine. Tape machines were relatively new at the time. And of course, the technical improvements now are just so amazing. At that time, a tape machine, to be able to record something like an editorial, it was a room that was probably 8 by 6 that the machine fit in. And of course, now it's just, you could go ahead and do it almost on a matchbook. So there were a lot of changes. I used to have to come into the station every night at 10 o'clock to do the editorial. And I'd be out mowing the lawn or something. I'd go in about 9:30. And I'd have a pair of shorts and sneakers on, but I'd have a coat and tie on. Would be just the upper half. And then when we got a tape, that was a big difference. You could go ahead and tape it in the afternoon, and then you had your evenings free. So there were some big technical changes in the organization. And one of the things we tried to do in our programming at the station was to have a lot of local programming. They have news. That's about the only local programming they have now. We used to have an afternoon movie. We used to have a noontime children's show. We used to, of course, do all our newscasts the same amount that we do now. But we also had discussion shows that they just don't have locally anymore. One was Ben Sidran came and did a half-hour show, the musician. Another one was Dick Goldberg, who was, I think he's a realtor in Madison now, developer in Madison now. He came in and did a half-hour show. We had a crazy program at Friday nights called Mephisto, where people were in costumes and everything. It was just, we really tried to do community things. And although I can't fault the stations now, they just don't do some of the things that we used to. And even had, this is kind of interesting, we had the top question of the day, television opinion poll, TOP, top question of the day. And at 6 o'clock, we'd ask a question. You know, do you think that so-and-so? And you could call one of two lines, a yes line or a no line. And then it would be recorded at the station, and at 10 o'clock at night, then they would report 52% people think this, 48% people think that. And when we're thinking of doing away with it, the top question is, should we continue the top question of the day? And the results were about 80% said no. So we finally took it off the air. But we also had fun. That was the important part, and I think the staff enjoyed it as well. We tried different things. And I think it was very inventive, but also we made a lot of mistakes. For example, I thought in Wausau, we used to start the program off the 10 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news with weather. It was Howie Gurnetsky and the weather. It was a little program. So when we came down here, we thought we'd do the same thing, start with weather. And then I said, well, weather is a news story. You know, I mean, if it's bad weather and it's going to be a problem, then it's a big story and you should put it in the front of the news. If it's going to be the same as it was today, tomorrow, just go ahead and say it's going to be the same as it was today, folks. And so just have it, you don't need a weather show. It's a news story. And so we experimented with that, and our ratings went just down. So that wasn't a very good idea. Our business over the years was very successful. It worked out well. We added stations to our organization, and then pretty soon the publishers that owned it decided that it was time to get out of the business and sell the organization. Over the years, they had taken some director fees, but they had never really gotten the money out of the station that it was worth. They had always put it back into the company to allow us to grow. And so finally, it was the time that we had to sell the company. And it was a company that was interested in buying us was a company by the name of Westray. And there were two gentlemen. One was William E. Simon, who was former Secretary of the Treasury, was the principal. And another guy was Ray Chambers, who was a money man and very well known. And they were buying up companies on a very leveraged fashion. And they had owned Simplicity Tractor here in Wisconsin. They owned, I think it was Avis Car Rental. They owned Anchor Glass. They just went out and they were just leveraged buyout firm. And they decided to buy our firm, and they sought us, and we were attracted to them. And so finally they decided to consummate the deal. And then I stayed with them for about 6 months, and then decided to leave. And they were great people to work for. I had no problem with it. They had no problem with me. We were making all of our estimates and our goals and everything. But I felt that it was time to leave, and I was only 52 years old. So at that point, I said that I was leaving. And it was for personal reasons, and it had nothing to do with my dissatisfaction with the company or the work or anything. And so I retired when I was quite young. And then a lot of other opportunities came along. I taught at Northwestern for a couple of years in broadcast management. I was asked to go on the board of a company called Farragut Communications, and the chairman of the board became ill, and they asked me if I would fill in as chairman of their board. And at that point I said, well, I had left a good job. I didn't want to get back involved, and they said, well, just, you know, just on a temporary basis, and so I went back and did work with them. And we bought a couple stations, and then this was with Allstate Venture Capital, and their management changed in that division, and they didn't want to continue along with broadcasting, so we sold it. There was a local broadcast company here, Shockley Communications, that I was on the board for a short while there. There were just other opportunities that opened up as we went along. Plus, Sheila and I were allowed to do a lot of traveling, but the major part of my life, or the biggest thing that affected my life, was a farm we owned out in Richland County. That was, I think, one of the reasons that I quit a very lucrative opportunity when I left Forward, but I wanted to spend more time at the farm. We wanted to do something out of Madison, either a summer home someplace or a cottage up north or whatever. And we said yes. So we went out. Well, it ended up that the people that we were with, this is kind of an interesting story. We bought the farm, and we divided it up so that we had title to the 40 where we built a small home, and they had title where they lived, and then we jointly owned, it ended up to be 200 acres. So we had 280 acres. But it was kind of interesting. We had a parcel, and we added another parcel because a realtor called us one Sunday morning and said, the property is available next to you. And this was what they always used to say, somebody from Illinois is coming up to look at it this afternoon, and I think they're going to buy it, but you might want to look at it. So we went to, the realtor came out, and we walked through the land. We knew the land. We knew the farmer that was selling it. And we said, yeah, let's talk about it. So we went back to his office, and it was a Sunday morning, and this other gentleman that was my friend, Ted, and I were sitting there, and we decided that we should really let our attorney, we had the same attorney, let the attorney know that we were doing this, just if he could see anything that we shouldn't be doing it, you know. And so I said, we'd like to call the gentleman. He said, the realtor said, fine, here, use the phone behind my desk. Because I went behind to call our attorney. And I looked down, and there was a pad of paper on the realtor's desk, and on it he says, call Gunkel and Bolger. They have lots of money, which wasn't true. But anyway, we bought that property, and it was just, and then Ted and Linda, the party that owned it, they had 5 children. We had 4 children. We would go out there, and our 9 children would get together, and they would play until all hours of the night, outside, in the barn, wherever, you know. It was just a great life. And I think that probably affected my life as much as any event. Probably my marriage to Sheila is number 1, and buying the farm is number 2. But we just had a marvelous time, and that really directed a lot of our life. And it was so powerful that in 1992, we tore down the house we had, rebuilt another house, and permanently moved there, and lived there for 20 years. And regretted really a lot when we decided it was time to move back to Madison and in more retirement mode. But it was a great experience. when we decided to move out to the farm, that was in '92, we decided we needed some facility in Madison, you know, if we were catching a plane or doing anything. And so we found an apartment on the west side of Madison that was just a perfect situation for us. And so we had that apartment, and we didn't know if we were going to use it for, you know, one night a month or one night a year or whatever. And we have a year-to-year lease on it. We thought, well, we'll try it for 1 year. It ended up that we had it for 17 years. It was just perfect. And then finally somebody said, well, as long as you've got something here, why don't you move to this retirement community called Prairie Point? And so we ended up doing an evaluation, and it just made sense to prepare for our later years. So we decided we would move to Prairie Point. This would be our temporary home in Madison while we continued to live full-time at the farm. And we did that for 3 years, and then we decided to leave the farm finally and sell it and move back permanently then in Prairie Point, where we are now currently. But the one thing that we were able to do after my retirement, I had mentioned that I was like 40 years old when I finally went to Europe and went to a trip in Switzerland. Well, one of the things we decided to do is see parts of the world. And so we had some great trips over the years. I think we've gone to almost well, not all countries, and most people, we've never been really to Russia, or we haven't been, we've been to a couple countries. We've been to Ecuador and South America and Argentina, but not many more. But we've covered Europe fairly well. And the East, we've been to Japan and China and Singapore, India, Vietnam. But one thing we decided, because our children didn't live close to us, we wanted to try to build up a better relationship with our children, so we took them on trips. And we would take 2 grandchildren and we'd go on a trip somewhere. And we took the first 2 to London, and that was more of a theater trip. And both of them had enjoyed that. It was seeing the countryside of England and spending time in London. And then we took 2 of the children to the Galapagos Island and Ecuador. And then we took 2 of the children to Vietnam and toured Vietnam. And then we took 2 children to Africa on a safari. We had been to Africa before on safari, but this was our second trip, and that was fun. But I think we've been in England quite frequently. Got very familiar with the subways and the transportation methods. One of my favorite cities was Rome. If I wasn't Irish, I'd want to be Italian. Love the food, love the culture. I love the people, and that was, we had a number of trips there. We rented a house in the Tuscany area for a while. We also rented a house in Interlaken in Switzerland on Lake Brienz, and that was a great experience. We had that for over a month, and then we'd had people come and visit us, which was always fun. But we've taken nothing that you would call very adventuresome, but they were all really worthwhile and fun to do. Most of them, in our younger years, we planned our own, and then in later years, we went in small groups. And I probably preferred the small group trips that were planned for us rather than trying to figure it out yourself, because a lot of times you ran into problems when you were doing it for yourself, and then you had to spend a lot of time trying to resolve the problem when you could have been enjoying the countryside. And so we found group travel was fun. One of the things that I did in Richland Center was really interesting and very worthwhile for me. Shayla was very involved in horseback riding, and her events were dressage that she was in, and she really was a good student of it, and she kept working at it, training her horses, etc. And so although we had a couple horses out at the farm, she always had one in training. And so she would go either into the Milwaukee area or the Madison area from the farm every day to work her horse. And she was probably gone 4 days a week on these trips. And of course, sometimes I had meetings or other things that I could go in with her, but a lot of times I was left alone out at the farm. You know, and you can go ahead and clean a barn so many times and, you know, do things in a garden so many times. But it was getting a little boring. And one day I can remember I went and I got the mail, and I walked to the back porch, and I got a Diet Pepsi, and I was sitting on the back porch looking at the mail and having my Diet Pepsi, and I came on the local newspaper and it said they were looking for a person to run the hospital foundation part-time. And I thought, I could do that. You know, I've raised money all my life in different organizations and community things. And so I applied for the job and I got it. So I was the head of the Richland Hospital Foundation, and I was working 20 hours a week. And it was one of the best jobs I ever had. It was more fun. I love the people there. The administrator of the hospital, Tom Warner, was just a delight to work for. It was just fun. And I would usually go to work in the morning, and then I would, because Shayla was gone, I didn't go back to the farm right away. I would go in and have lunch, and I'd usually stay 2 periods for lunch because the lunchroom was a small room and could accommodate maybe 4 long tables, you know, of 8 people. And so the first shift would come in, and you'd be sitting with a doctor on one side and a maintenance guy on the other, and then we'd talk. And it was more fun, the conversation we'd have. Some was political, some was hunting, some was weather, some was sports, but it was always interesting. And then they built onto the hospital. They increased the size of the cafeteria. So there were then a lot of tables there. So all the doctors would eat at one table, and all the people on the maintenance crew would be on another table, the nurses at another. There was no mixture of people, and all the fun was gone. But anyway, when I first went, it was just a wonderful job. And after 2 years, I found that we were traveling a lot and just working 20 hours a week is so much. So I came in and I told Tom, I said, I've got to leave. I said, I hate to leave, but you should hire somebody full-time. It's a full-time job and somebody needed. And he said, well, we're going to miss you. He said, would you stay as my assistant and work 10 hours a week? And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I could work 20 hours one week and then take off the next week. So it was a perfect arrangement. And I did all the stuff that I wanted to do. I had a weekly cable show that I did out there. I did all the advertising on radio that I love to do. It was just, everything just worked out perfectly. And I worked for 3 years as Tom's assistant. And then I developed prostate cancer. And I was going to be in treatment for 6 to 8 months, so I decided I better leave. So I left. And the payment that I got, they gave me insurance, and that was it, because I was too young for Medicaid Medicare at the time. One of the things that was the advantage of working at the hospital, usually when somebody from a city moves out to the country, they're the city folks, you know, and they're not part of the community. But this way I was part of the community because I was working with community people, and I got to know all these people. So when we'd go to the drugstore, to the grocery store, you know, I would greet people down the hall. You know, I got to know them, they got to know me. And that was the real fun part of it. We could really feel that we were part of the Richland community. We hated to leave. Moved here to Prairie Point, and this has been perfect. We've been here for almost 16 years now. A couple of years ago, my wife had some problems and now is in memory care at Attic Angels, but that's just 2 blocks away. It's part of a facility, and she's safe there and relatively happy there. And I think it's working out in her best interest to be there. But it's just my whole life has been so blessed with really looking back. I've had so many great opportunities. People have always been so nice to me. And I've been lucky. I've taken jobs that have been perfect. I've gone to schools that have worked out well. I've made friends that are lasting and good. There are fewer friends now, of course, than there were 10, 20 years ago. But I look back, I think some of my happiest days are when I can think of as playing golf at Spring Green with a group of friends and walking down a fairway on a warm summer day, or out on a tractor cutting grass, or being with my kids, doing something on a walk or whatever. We've had great opportunities together. I mentioned the trip. We introduced our kids, I think, to nature, and I think that's been a big part of all their lives, is the outside and reasonable use of that. But it's if anybody has been fortunate, it's been me, and I really appreciate that and want to say thanks.